"Where'd you steal that helmet from, old man?" The words cut through the crisp morning air at Edwards Air Force Base like a blade. The young lieutenant stood there, arms crossed, smirking at the elderly gentleman in worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt, who clutched a battered flight helmet against his chest. The helmet bore scars of time, its paint chipped and faded, but there was something about it, something the lieutenant couldn't quite place. The old man simply looked at him with quiet eyes and said nothing. If you believe respect should be given before it's demanded, type honor in the comments below. His name was Robert Chen, though few people at the base that morning knew it. At 78 years old, Robert moved slowly, his gait betraying the thousands of flight hours that had compressed his spine and the injuries that came with pushing machinery to its absolute limits. He had driven 4 hours that morning to visit his old friend, now General Marcus Webb, who commanded the very base where Robert had once made history. But that history was painted over, filed away in classified folders, and lived only in the memories of men who were now as old as he was. Robert wore no uniform that day. He carried no credentials. He had only that helmet, the one he'd kept in a box in his garage for nearly 50 years, and the quiet dignity of a man who had nothing left to prove. The airbase hummed with activity as F-35s screamed overhead, their afterburners painting white lines across the desert sky. Robert had arrived early, before his scheduled meeting with the general, and had decided to walk the flight line, to breathe in the smell of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid one more time. He hadn't expected to be stopped. He certainly hadn't expected to be questioned by men young enough to be his grandchildren, pilots whose entire careers existed because of tests he had flown when their parents were still in diapers. But there he stood, in the shadow of the newest generation of fighter aircraft, holding a relic from an era these young aviators had only read about in history books, if they'd read about it at all. "I'm serious, sir." The lieutenant's voice dripped with barely concealed contempt, the word "sir" deployed with surgical sarcasm. 2 other young pilots had gathered now, drawn by the confrontation like moths to flame. "That's military property. That's a test pilot helmet from the 60s or 70s. Where exactly did you get it?" Robert's weathered fingers tightened slightly on the helmet. He could see the call sign painted on its side, faded but still visible in the morning light. "It's mine," he said simply, his voice soft, almost apologetic. The pilots exchanged glances. One of them, a captain with sharp features and sharper eyes, stepped forward. "You're telling me you were a test pilot, here at Edwards?" There was no belief in his voice, only accusation. "I didn't say that," Robert replied carefully. "I said the helmet is mine." But the damage was done. The captain laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Right. And I'm Chuck Yeager. Look, I don't know what your story is. Maybe you bought this at some surplus store. Maybe you found it at a garage sale, but you can't just walk around a military installation with stolen equipment." The word "stolen" hung in the air like smoke. Robert felt something inside him tighten, not anger, but a profound sadness. These boys, these children in their flight suits covered in patches they'd barely earned, had no idea what they were doing, but he had learned long ago that some lessons can only be taught by time and humility, not by words from an old man in civilian clothes. "I'm here to see General Webb," Robert said, his voice still quiet but carrying a firmness now. "He's expecting me at 0900. The lieutenant checked his watch with exaggerated precision. "It's 0815, and I'm sure the base commander has better things to do than meet with helmet thieves." Another pilot, this one barely old enough to shave, chimed in. "My grandfather was a pilot. He told me about guys who pretend to be veterans, who steal valor. It's disgusting." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Robert's jaw tightened. His eyes, which had remained calm and patient, flickered with something darker. "Son," he said slowly, "you should be very careful about the accusations you make." But the young pilot was emboldened now. Or what? You'll tell us about your glory days? About missions that never happened? About call signs you never earned? It was at that moment that a black SUV came to a sharp stop 50 feet away. The door opened and out stepped General Marcus Webb, 3 stars gleaming on his shoulder boards, his face already darkening as he processed the scene before him. He had been heading to his office early when his aide had radioed about a situation on the flight line. Behind him, a colonel emerged from the passenger side, his eyes widening as he caught sight of the helmet in Robert's hands. The general's stride was purposeful, almost aggressive, as he closed the distance. The young pilots snapped to attention, suddenly aware that they were about to have a very different kind of morning than they'd anticipated. "Lieutenant," the general's voice was ice, "would you care to explain why you're harassing my guest?" The lieutenant's face went pale. "Sir, this civilian was carrying military equipment. He claimed..." "Claimed what?" The general cut him off. "That the helmet was his?" He turned to Robert, and his expression transformed completely, warming into something that looked like profound respect mixed with old affection. "Bob, I'm so sorry. I should have sent an escort." Robert shook his head slightly. "It's all right, Marcus. They were just doing their job." But the general's attention had already snapped back to the young pilots. "Do you know who you're talking to? Do you have any idea?" The silence was absolute. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. The TT. General pointed at the helmet. "Captain, read me that call sign. The one painted on the side." The captain leaned in, squinting at the faded letters. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Phantom. Phantom 01. The colonel behind the general closed his eyes and shook his head slowly. The general's voice dropped to a deadly quiet. "And do you know what that call sign represents?" The pilots said nothing. Phantom 01 was the call sign for the lead pilot on Project Dark Star, the classified hypersonic test program that flew in 1978. 16 missions at speeds exceeding Mach 6, altitudes that pushed the edge of space, technology that was 20 years ahead of its time, missions so dangerous that 3 pilots died during the test series. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Robert Chen flew 14 of those 16 missions. He was the only pilot skilled enough and crazy enough to push that aircraft to its limits and bring it home. Twice he landed with systems failures that should have killed him. Once he ejected at Mach 4 and somehow survived. The general stepped closer to the young pilots, his voice rising now. "The reason you fly 5th-generation fighters today, the reason we have hypersonic weapons in development, the reason we maintained air superiority for the last 50 years, starts with men like Commander Chen. And you," he pointed at the lieutenant, "you accused him of being a thief." The lieutenant looked like he might be sick. Robert raised a hand gently. "Marcus, it's all right. They didn't know." But the general wasn't finished. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, twice. His work remains classified to this day, and after he retired from active duty, he spent another 20 years as a consultant, training pilots, improving systems, making the skies safer for everyone who came after him. And you disrespected him because he's old and wearing jeans. The captain found his voice, thin and shaking. "Sir, Commander Chen, I apologize. I had no idea. Robert looked at the young man and saw something he recognized. The terror of realizing you've made a catastrophic mistake, mixed with the dawning understanding of how much you don't know. "It's all right, son," Robert said quietly. "You're young. You'll learn." But the general wasn't ready to let it go. "No, Bob, it's not all right. This is about more than one encounter. This is about respect, about remembering that everyone you meet has a story, has a past, has earned their place. You don't judge a book by its cover, and you sure as hell don't judge a warrior by his age or his clothes." The general turned to the colonel. I want these 3 pilots to spend the next month in the archives. I want them to read every declassified report from the test pilot programs of the 60s and 70s. I want them to understand the sacrifices made by the men who came before them. And I want a formal apology written and placed in Commander Chen's file. He looked back at the young pilots. You're dismissed, and consider yourselves fortunate that Commander Chen is a more forgiving man than I am. The 3 pilots saluted sharply, their faces masks of shame, and retreated quickly. As they walked away, Robert could hear one of them say quietly, "Oh my God, did you see how many hours he must have logged? That helmet has seen things we can't even imagine." The general placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. "I'm sorry, old friend. They should know better." Robert smiled, a small, sad smile. "They're kids, Marcus. They think the world started when they were born. We were the same way once." The general laughed. "You were never that arrogant, Bob, even when you had every right to be." They walked together toward the general's office, Robert still clutching his helmet. Behind them, the base continued its daily rhythm. But something had shifted. Word would spread, as it always did on military bases. By the end of the day, everyone would know about the old man in civilian clothes who had once pushed experimental aircraft to the edge of space. And perhaps, just perhaps, a few young pilots would learn to look beyond the surface, to recognize that heroism doesn't always wear a uniform, and that respect should be given freely, especially to those who have already earned it 1,000 times over. Robert Chen would spend that afternoon with his old friend, sharing stories over coffee, looking at old photographs, remembering the days when the sky was a frontier and every flight could be your last. The helmet sat on the general's desk between them, a silent witness to history, its faded paint and scuffed surface more valuable than any medal. And somewhere on that base, 3 young pilots sat in an archive room, pulling dusty files, beginning to understand the weight of the legacy they carried and the depth of their ignorance. If you believe respect is earned through service but should be given before it's demanded, if you believe we should honor those who came before us regardless of how they're dressed, then subscribe to this channel. Because every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, and every old warrior was once young and untested, just like you. Share this story if you believe that age deserves respect and that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized and always unpretentious. Honor those who served, respect those who sacrificed, and never, ever judge a person by their appearance alone.